Welcome to the first episode of Mr. Plumb's Thoughts. I've been thinking about doing videos for a long time. I've even attempted with a friend at one point. We sat down and recorded a whole entire video and then realized we didn't actually hit record. So, but I figure it's as good a time as any. I've thought about doing long scripted videos, with quotes and sources, and I may do that too, but I thought for right now it might just be best to make a video and throw out my thoughts on topics. The topic today is Plural Marriage of Joseph Smith. This is an interesting topic. It seems we can never get a satisfactory answer about it. The church continues to give us very vague just vague information on it. There was a recent article that just came out in the Gospel Topic Essays, and it basically says, well, you have a whole bunch of people that have come out and said, hey, this confirms Joseph Smith did it for sure. And so I'm like, okay, is that what that says? I'll go check it out. So I went and I read it, and pro tip, that's not what it says. If you read carefully, it says that evidence suggests that Joseph Smith practiced plural marriage. So the wording there is basically the church saying they're not giving us an objective answer. They're not giving us a revealed truth. They're just giving us a conclusion based on available evidence. But I find this a little bit disturbing because the evidence actually says quite the opposite. You start digging into it, you find out some interesting things. First, Joseph Smith himself, a month before he died, testified from the pulpit that he had been accused of 7 wives and he could only find one. So I have to ask you, is a prophet of God? Or I'm sorry, does a prophet of God lie? That's the question. If a prophet of God lies, is he a prophet of God? So a lot of people have taken up the stance that Joseph Smith carefully worded his answer so he could deceive people, but that's not a good answer to me either, because that's not what prophets do, right? Prophets are not in the business of deception. They're not in the business of lying. They're in the business of plain and simple truths. So what do we have here? We have Joseph Smith denying polygamy, but then you have a whole bunch of people after he died. Interestingly, the first real claims arose a couple of decades after he died, but there were a few that popped up shortly after he died, of women claiming to have been his, or sorry, not of women, of other people claiming that he had plural wives. We didn't get any women claiming that they were plural wives until quite a bit later, specifically in the Temple Lot case in the 1890s for Temple Lot, something like that. So by then, Joseph Smith had been dead for 50 years. And then you had all these women coming out that were saying, oh, yeah, we were his plural wife. The judge himself, though, in the opinion of that case, eviscerated those women and basically said their testimonies were bogus. The judge was kind of mocked them a little bit, saying, hey, if this is a religion meant if this is a practice meant to procreate, where are all the babies? Right? Joseph Smith was in the prime of his life. He was a very healthy man. He was continually popping out babies with Emma. So where are all the other babies from all the other plural wives, right? In 1933, there was a report by the church history department that said that, if I can recall my facts off the top of my head here, something like there had been 190 children or 190 descendants from Joseph Smith and Emma, and this was in 1933. I don't know how many there would be today, a lot more obviously. So now we have genetic testing, and genetic testing is interesting because every single person who has claimed to have been a descendant from Joseph Smith, a descendant from one of Joseph Smith's plural wives, has been found to not have any relation to Joseph Smith at all. So there's actually no evidence at all that Joseph Smith ever procreated with another woman. So we have to ask ourselves what's going on here, right? Brigham Young 9 years after the prophet died, Brigham Young revealed the revelation of plural marriage to the church. He said it had been sitting on his desk in a lockbox for 9 months, for 9 years, and that it wasn't time yet for it, but that when he released it, it finally was time. But he also said that Joseph Smith had been practicing in secret plural marriage. So we have to consider here again, our prophets don't lie, right? At least they're not supposed to. So what is Brigham Young saying? To understand the plural marriage question, we actually have to understand the priesthood question. If we go back to the beginning of the Restoration, we had a handful of black men that received the priesthood. Among them was Elijah Abel. After these men received the priesthood was restricted again. So you had a case here where on the books, the priesthood is restricted to blacks, yet we have a handful of blacks who had the priesthood. So what gives? Well, this is how God works. And it's a pattern, and if you understand how God works and you understand his patterns, you can apply them to other domains. So what happened here is those men, including Elijah Abel, said, hey, we want to get the priesthood. And this was the first time, at least that we're aware of, since the days of Canaan, where black men actually requested the priesthood. Now God, who likes to give us what we desire and what we want, he said, okay, you want the priesthood, prove to me that you can have it, that you can hold it righteously, that you can wield it without corruption. So these few men got it, and then God said, okay, that's it, no more for now. Let's just see what they do. So Elijah Abel and these men, they held that priesthood righteously until their dying day. What happened after that? God saw that black men could wield the priesthood righteously, and that's when the ball began rolling. That eventually led to the civil rights movement, and then ultimately blacks receiving the priesthood again. So effectively what you had was a small group of people who, not in secret, but really more just privately, right, had the priesthood and were being tested with it. So the same thing happens with plural marriage. You get Joseph Smith, who's reading in the scriptures, and he sees this stuff about, plural wives in the Bible, and so he goes to God and he asks. And God says, well, I took that away from the world already because it was, they were being abused. We know King Solomon abused it, right? So it was taken away from us. So Joseph said, hey, what is this? And God said, well, if you can prove to me that it can be done righteously, then I'll give it to you. So what does he do? He gives Joseph Smith and a few other people in private permission to have plural wives, even though the standard in the church was one man, one woman, which Joseph Smith repeatedly affirmed. So you might be thinking, well, then Joseph Smith did do it, right? Not quite, because we've got a problem. D&C 132 says that it requires requires permission from the first wife. And we know from Emma's own testimony to her dying day that she never gave Joseph permission. So Joseph, he wants to obey, right? He's got this commandment as early as 1831 from most accounts. He's had it for a long time, and he's been trying to convince Emma. Emma won't do it. We get the temple. Once the temple's built, Joseph Smith starts getting sealed to some of these women. And from what we can gather, he was sealed to, several dozen people. Then in D&C 132, the Lord scolds Emma and says, accept these women that I've given to Joseph, or basically you'll be destroyed, right? So Joseph was already sealed to some, and those were the women that Joseph was supposed to engage in a civil union with and procreate with. But he could never convince Emma to do it, and so he never did. We have a conundrum here, right? And this conundrum, since we find all the patterns and examples in Scripture, this goes all the way back to Adam and Eve. So Eve partook of the forbidden fruit, right? And then we have Adam who goes, I've been commanded not to take of that fruit, but I've also been commanded to cleave unto my wife, right? So he's got this interesting conundrum. If Adam had not partaken of the fruit, he would have been obeying God's command, right? If he did that, he would have violated his marriage covenant. And if he violated his marriage covenant, he doesn't only offend Eve, but he would have also offended God, because the marriage covenant is between the spouse and God. So Adam, he partake of the fruit. He honored his marriage covenant, and he offended God. Because he offended God, there was consequences for it, right? The fall still happened. He still became mortal. He still had to deal with everything. But he only offended God, and he didn't offend his marriage covenant. So he chose the lesser of two evils, and because of that, it was counted toward righteousness for him. Joseph Smith, same thing here. Now you've got Emma saying, nope, I will not partake of that forbidden fruit. And Joseph's like, we've been told to partake of the forbidden fruit. And Emma says, nope, I won't do it. So Joseph has a conundrum. Does he obey God and go practice this, thereby offending his marriage covenant and therefore also offending God? Or does he refrain from doing it and only offend God? And that's the crux of the matter here. And Joseph Smith chose the right thing. Well, exactly you would expect a prophet to do, right? To choose the lesser of the two evils. And so for that, Joseph Smith is in the rest of God right now, but he also suffered the consequence. An angel appeared to him 3 times over 10 years. And those 3 times threatened Joseph Smith to obey. The 3rd time, which was closer to Joseph's death, the angel appeared with a flaming sword and said, if you do not do this, you will be destroyed. What happened shortly thereafter? Joseph Smith died. Now we know Joseph Smith wasn't supposed to die. How do we know this? Because we have a prophecy in D&C that says, hey, if you live till 1890, you'll see the second coming of Christ. So there's agency in here, right? Joseph Smith could have lived until 1890 and seen the second coming of Christ if everything had gone how God intended. But Joseph Smith couldn't convince Emma, and so history unfolded, right? So I think it's pretty important just to point out that Joseph Smith was sealed to many, but he never entered into a civil union, and there's no evidence that he did. None at all whatsoever. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope to make more.